At the outset of this debate, I just want to pay tribute to the brave women who've come forward in recent weeks to speak about the abuse that they've received at the hands of violent men. We're all now very familiar with the story of the incredibly brave Natasha O'Brien, a remarkable young woman, someone who steps in when they see something wrong. She confronted a man yelling homophobic abuse in the street and who was then brutally assaulted by Cathal Crotty, a serving member of the Defence Forces, as his friends stood by and watched. Then this week, Bláthnaid Rala waived her right to anonymity after the man who raped her, John Moran, was sentenced to 8 years. She said to reporters outside the courthouse that she wanted to put the shame back on him after feeling totally isolated in the aftermath of her horrific assault. Going through months of treatment in a sexual assault victims unit as her rapist moved freely around his community. A look at the stories coming out of the courts this week paints a horrific picture of the reality of women's safety in Ireland. The 2 young women who were raped by a taxi driver, Raymond Shorten, in Dublin. One of the young women described how she thought she was taking the safe option, the option that we're told to take. Don't walk home alone at night, get a taxi. What is glaring in this case is that he had previous convictions for sexual offences. Why was this man allowed to have a taxi licence? Why is anyone with a record of sexual violence allowed to have a taxi licence? To pick up people alone and get their home address, does that seem safe to anyone? The NTA, as the taxi regulator, needs to wake up and needs to do an immediate review of their drivers to ensure the safety of people who step into those cars. Ireland has a violence against women problem, and Ireland has always had a violence against women problem. At every step of our state's history, it has been endemic and it has been structural. We have locked women away, shamed them, abused them, and silenced them. Generations of Irish women have had to endure misogyny. Culturally, perpetrators are protected and victims are blamed. Coercion and street harassment are dismissed, not to mind the legacy of mother and baby homes and repeated women's health scandals. And then every few years, we have an epiphany. Oh God, that was horrible. How was that allowed to happen? It can never happen again. But it always happens again. Because we have not taken the steps as a country to ensure that it never happens again. Our justice system wasn't built to protect these victims of crime. In fact, it often seems to compound the trauma. When someone, predominantly women, experiences sexual or domestic violence, there are barriers at every step of their journey. The first step after experiencing a sexual assault would generally be to present yourself to a medical facility. But for women in rural areas, outside of hours, medical services are barely existent. In West Cork, in my own constituency, as for most rural areas, there is no sexual assault treatment unit. So the reality of what that step looks like is that someone who's just gone through an incredibly traumatic assault is then put into potentially a Garda car, not even able to shower, and driven to Cork City. Another initial step is often victims' experience with the Gardaí and reporting sexual violence, and that can be negative. The Rape Crisis Network report in 2022 found that only 64% found they had been treated in a sensitive manner by Gardaí. For survivors, their initial engagement with Gardaí is the first step in the criminal justice system, and it sets the tone for their experience going forward. Victims of sexual assault are very well aware that the likelihood of receiving justice is astronomically low. And that is reflected in the fact that only 5% of those who experience sexual violence as an adult even report it to Gardaí, rising to 12% of those who experience sexual violence as a child. The number of female rape victims in Ireland is almost 3 times higher than the EU average, and how many of them actually receive justice? I and so many others are really glad that the DPP has decided to review the shamefully lenient sentencing of Cathal Crotty. But this isn't an isolated case. There needs to be a wholesale reform of how courts and judges treat sexual and domestic abuse and how they treat victims in that. We need to see reformed sentencing guidelines. We need to know why they haven't materialised. We need continuous training for judges and barristers, and we need to see an end to some of the most brutal and shameful practices in courts, where victims are shamed and re-traumatised at every step. I'm thinking of what we've heard of underwear being passed around the courts, of counselling notes being used. Minister, over 250 women have been violently killed since 1996. The vast majority of resolved cases, in them they were killed by a man known to them. In half of the cases, they were killed by a current or former partner. People can't leave a violent household if there's nowhere to go. We need more refuge spaces. The state is only providing about 29% of the required refuge spaces. The Istanbul Convention standard is 1 space per 10,000 people. Ireland provides a fraction of that. Cork City and County, with a population of over 500,000, should have 54 spaces. It has 6. We know there are many counties that have none. Domestic violence leave was introduced, providing 5 days leave, half of what was recommended. I would challenge anyone to pick up your life, your children, flee your home, arrange your own accommodation because the local authority will not do it for you. Go to the Gardaí, get a solicitor, go to court, do all of the custody hearings, all within 5 days. Not to mention how much harder this can be for disabled women. In a growing number of cases, victims of domestic violence lose custody, with a noted pattern of their partners weaponising the parental alienation concept. Minister, crucially, we need education. I was struck by the words of Bláthnaid Riley this week, stating, "I've noticed in the fallout of Natasha O'Brien's case and my own case is that there's a demographic of young men who don't want to speak out against their peers. I've so many messages of support from people. 95% of them are from women and the rest are older men. That's wrong. I also think there's a misconception that perpetrators in sexual violence cases are older men. They aren't. They're young guys in our friendship circles." There is an immediate need for education on consent and sexual violence, coercion and online abuse. There's been an online radicalisation of young men in particular in recent years that we just haven't gotten a hold of. If we're to meaningfully address the prevalence of violence against women in Ireland, we need to address the structural barriers that enable it. And finally, Count Corley, I just briefly want to acknowledge the work that the Minister has done on this issue, because as far as I know, it's the First Minister to make it a focus. And I think we've heard some ridiculous commentary about that in recent times, calling it woke and all of these things. The number of women being killed and violently assaulted, there's nothing woke about addressing that. And I just want to commend her for her focus on it.